Hello and welcome to the NCAA Selection Special. We are the College Basketball Pick and Fade podcast. I'm Max Schneider. He's Harrison Rotman. Fourth year in a row doing this. Past three have all gone pretty well. I think the brackets have not gone as well as the videos have. So hopefully this year is the year that turns around and we can get the champions right at least this year. But just saw the bracket drop about 3 hours ago. Initial thoughts on just kind of the bracket, and it came up quick. Definitely came up quick with the conference tournaments. They sort of flew by this year.
Yeah, came up quick. Super excited as always. Have received plenty of questions as to when our pod's coming out, so we're ready to go. Excited that others are excited to listen to us ramble for 45 minutes to an hour about stuff that no one's probably thought about until right now. So happy to be here. Happy to get into things and ready to hopefully perform in our brackets this year.
Yeah, definitely. And so speaking of our brackets, we are having the bracket pool again. That's going to be the pick and fade bracket pool. All the details for that will be in the description on this video. So go down, click the link, join the pool. We want to grow it as big as we can. Goal is to have over 100 entries this year. So got close last year. Definitely join the pool, and have your friends join the pool too. And if you need any info, reach out to me, reach out to Harrison, whichever one of us you know better. It's probably the best way to get it. So let's get into it. Starting with just kind of the overall thoughts on the bracket and the bubble and seeing which teams didn't get in. I know the two of us specifically, little disappointed to not see St. John's and Seton Hall. Some of that is a little bit of our East Coast bias, but also saw those teams this year, and both of them I think had really good claims to get in, particularly over some teams like Michigan State and Virginia.
Yeah, absolutely. Those were specifically the two teams that I was looking for while I was watching the bracket show. Unfortunately, neither of them made it. As of about a week or two ago, both teams were projected as, last four teams in. Unfortunately, a lot of bid stealers this year. Apparently, last year there were none. And this year it looked like there were about 3, 4 different teams that probably weren't going to make it unless they won their conference tournament. And since they did, they pushed down a couple of those teams that we were looking to see. Seton Hall, St. John's, Indiana State had a really good year and they didn't make it. So, a lot of tough decisions were clearly made by the committee. We don't agree on some of them, but, we're not part of the committee. But yeah, I mean, also, what do you think about that first quadrant? Seems like kind of mercy grow a little bit.
And the way we'll kind of do this is we'll go quadrant by quadrant. So we'll get to each kind of team and where we think the committee got it right and wrong. But I mean, I think watching the start of the show and seeing that East quadrant come up, and it was just UConn and then FAU and San Diego State, who were both Final Four teams last year, and then the SEC champ in Auburn, the Big Ten champ in Illinois, like the Big 12 champ in Iowa State.
Yeah.
The conference is stacked. So I guess this is the committee daring people to kind of pick against UConn, and we expect UConn to be the most popular championship pick here, and they are the best team, it looks like. But that quadrant seems so much stronger than the other three that it's so much of a gauntlet for UConn or really any other team to get out of there. And that's, I think, where kind of the biggest discrepancy with the committee comes. These quadrants are supposed to be relatively equal. And when you put the four conference champs from the four top conferences all in the same quadrant, doesn't really feel that way.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't feel like that way at all. I mean, going through all the quadrants, it felt like each quadrant was getting progressively worse. After we saw the first quadrant, we're looking at teams that are, Auburn as a 4 seed. We both thought that they would potentially even be as high as the 2 line, if not at least the 3. Iowa State was, I thought, in contention to being the 4th 1 seed, and they ended up as a 2 seed in UConn's quadrant. And then Illinois finished the year extremely strong, winning the Big Ten conference tournament as a 3 seed, could have easily been a 2. So that quadrant, extremely difficult. San Diego State as a 5 seed, they're always a tough outcome March. So that's not even an easy matchup for potentially Auburn in the second round. And then FAU made the Final Four, and they're an 8 seed. Weren't they an 8 seed last year? Didn't they, perform well in that exact position?
But they were in that 8-9
matchup. 8-9 matchup, exactly. So they're used to it. We got a lot of veteran teams in this quadrant, and we both think that the committee definitely got it wrong. It's a little unfair to some of those teams that won their conference tournament and now have to play such a gauntlet of a quadrant.
Yep, definitely. So let's get into the East. As we mentioned, very stacked quadrant, 11 conference champions in this quadrant alone, more than all 3 other quadrants. more than any quadrant, I think, in the past 5 years is
I
the
can't,
is the stat that I
can't be
saw
many
about.
more. So that makes sense.
Yeah, it can't be. I mean, 11 is about as many as you're realistically going to get. So let's go through the top of this quadrant. I mean, again, we're not going to pick every game here, but just kind of initial thoughts on some of these matchups, and particularly these first two matchups. I'll be there in Brooklyn to see UConn Stetson and FAU Northwestern. FAU Northwestern will kickstart Friday's slate of games. And I mean, I think it's an interesting spot for FAU. I think they get a good draw in Northwestern in the first round. Obviously, last year they advanced a lot further than that, but that's because Fairleigh Dickinson beats Purdue. I don't think we're going to have a repeat of that this year. So if FAU does get past Northwestern, they're running into a buzzsaw on a team that has a lot more size than they do. FAU frequently plays four guards at a time, all of whom are shorter than UConn's point guard, Tristan Newton. So that's a tough matchup for them if they get there. And then the bottom part of the quadrant, or of these four matchups, San Diego State UAB is a great game. UAB is really hot, but again, San Diego State looks really strong. They still play that pack line with Brian Dutcher, and they just kind of know how to win these games. I think they probably get it done. Yale was feisty today against Brown.
Close one. They almost lost to a 13-17 Brown team.
They did. They did hit that buzzer beater at the very end of that game to advance to the tournament. But they draw a nightmare 4 seed in Auburn, who, like we said, probably is good enough to be a 2. A metrics darling. Auburn's a top 5 Ken Pom team, top 5 in the net, won the SEC championship,
Shouldn't be a
routinely
4.
beats down on lesser opponents and goes 10 deep and plays all 10 guys legitimate minutes.
Right, right. And did you know that the Yale Brown game was going to be at Columbia today?
No, I didn't know.
I didn't know that either. It was at Columbia. It looked like a great time. I would have went if I knew.
Yeah,
But it was a great atmosphere, and Yale beat Brown at the buzzer. Historically speaking, Ivy League teams have actually done pretty well in the
yeah,
NCAA tournament. They're pretty frequently 13 or 14 seed, always have to play, one of the better conference teams. Last year we saw Princeton, I believe, get all the way to the Sweet 16.
yeah,
So they won 2 games, one against 2 seed Arizona in the first round, and they lost to Creighton, I believe, in the Sweet 16. So Ivy League performs well in the tournament. I agree. Auburn is a pretty tough matchup. One of the best teams in the country, in my opinion, and Bruce Pearl's got those guys playing extremely hard. It seems like Auburn gets into a fight almost every game now. So if you want to see hard-nosed technical fouls on either side, tune into the Auburn game. Let's see if those Yale guys are up for the challenge. But that's going to be a tough one for Yale. I kind of like Auburn there. In the San Diego State matchup, UAB is one of those teams. They have an interesting style of defense. I was watching their championship game earlier today, and they had 3 guys on the ball at half court. So it wasn't a double team; it was a triple team of the guy with the ball. They just simply just threw multiple defenders at them, and then they scramble and they catch up. And then because of that, they cause a lot of turnovers and have a lot of fast break points. So interesting matchup with a San Diego State team that I feel like is usually a slower, methodical offensive team. So it could be interesting to see which team plays at the other team's pace. And then FAU, I think they've got a pretty good matchup with Northwestern. I like them as well, but they got UConn in the second round. It's not they're not going to get lucky and get the 16 seed again in the second round. So
yep.
I think that they might their luck might be beginning to run out in the second round there. But an interesting 4 matchups there. Definitely looking forward to that Auburn Yale one though.
Yeah, me too. And then hopefully moving forward, if we can get that Auburn UConn game, I think that's a really great game. One of the toughest tests, if not the toughest test
Oh
that
yeah,
UConn will get all season, and obviously the toughest test that Auburn will get all season. And the offense in that game, the pace
right.
probably will play in the 80s or 90s.
Yeah, that's a
But
championship. That's a championship level game, I think, happening in the
yes.
third round. So it's the committee. They they did it to us. They made
Yeah,
that
I think you see
matchup happen
Auburn in
early. Yeah,
exactly. I think you see Auburn in another region, and they're a likely Final Four team, has a
right.
shot to make the championship game. The road here just feels so much tougher for them. Auburn is the only team in the country that's top 10 in both offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency. So that should bode well for them come the tournament. Let's move to the bottom part of the East region. Snoozer for the first one, in my opinion. BYU, Duquesne. How Duquesne's an 11, I don't really know. BYU, we do know, is a 6. were supposed to be a 5 and were switched with Gonzaga because BYU can't play games on Sundays, and that was when their 5 seed game would have been. So they're a 6 seed playing Duquesne, then Illinois Morehead State, Washington State Drake, and Iowa State South Dakota State. What kind of jumps out to you here?
Yeah, I mean, I think what jumps out to me as the most competitive first round matchup of these four is definitely the Washington State Drake game. We've been watching college basketball for a long time, and I haven't seen Washington State in the tournament, so it's
Yeah,
interesting. It's cool for them to get in there this year. They were the second best team in the Pac-12 all year, in I guess the Pac-12's final year, right?
yeah,
So they're a pretty good team. They've got really good size. I believe they're the tallest team in college basketball, and they only start one guy below like 6'7", I think. So they're massive team. Drake, I guess we could call it an upset. They beat Indiana State in their conference chip. They're a consistently good team every year. They've got Tucker DeVries, who's got to be 23, 24 years old by now. He's been on the team for years, as their superstar, kind of probably most experienced player in that game. So I'm leaning Drake in that first round matchup with a little bit more experience. And then the rest of the matchups, Illinois and Iowa State are pretty easy picks for me. And BYU Duquesne, I believe I texted you. That's a whack game when they first when they first announced that game on the screen. So BYU's kind of a live or die by the three type of team. So they're either hot and they'll beat you out the gym, or they're not and they can lose to a pretty low quality of team. I'm leaning BYU. They've got more experience in a tougher conference. Duquesne kind of came out of nowhere winning the A10. So I'm leaning BYU there, and I don't think BYU can really get by Illinois, though.
yeah. I think you're right. I lean BYU that way too. BYU had a strong debut in the Big 12. They went 10-8 in conference. Obviously, they're earning a 6 seed here. This has been a strong year for them. They do shoot the three really well. Duquesne is an interesting matchup. Not a team that was supposed to be here. Won the A10 tournament, got by both Dayton and VCU. Uh, I probably like BYU as well. I think they just have too many guys that can score. They don't really have one guy. Everybody can shoot the three, and when they can space the floor like that, is as including Ali Khalifa, who plays the 5 for them.
Right.
They can create matchup nightmares when they're able to spread the floor like that. I think you're right that that's the most interesting game. Drake is good enough offensively to give Iowa State a little trouble if they have an off shooting night because of how defensive focused Iowa State is, and they like to play games in the 60s and sometimes even the 50s,
Yep.
which can lend itself to a close game in a tournament if Drake gets hot. But I think Iowa State and Illinois are kind of on a collision course here for that 2-3 matchup.
That's
Illinois
a
could
great
struggle with
matchup
BYU.
too.
It is a great matchup.
That's like a Final Four caliber matchup. These are two potential Final Four championship caliber matchups happening in the same quadrant. So, um, assuming we see it, I think Illinois Iowa State would be a great game. Illinois has more star power, but Iowa State, that defense, they win games in the 50s very frequently. So that's going to be a good one.
Yeah, it's such a clash of styles there. Illinois routinely playing in the 80s, 90s, Iowa State in the 50s and 60s. Uh, I don't know if anyone on Iowa State can stop, obviously can slow down a little bit, but can stop Terrence Shannon the way he's playing right now. These last 3 tournament games, 28 points, 40 points, I think 34 points en route to that Big Ten championship. He's been playing incredibly right now. Marcus Damask also had a great game today. The thing with Illinois that kind of sticks out to me is I think Illinois has a great chance to beat teams that don't have dominant bigs. And if they run into a team like that, I think that's what can trip them up. Coleman Hawkins is easily their best defender, but ironically defends every position but his own very well. He's not great against kind of those big 5 men, which you saw against Zach Edey this year.
Yeah.
And obviously everyone struggles against Edey, but he struggles to guard his position a little bit, whereas he's much better at switching on to guards and guarding those guys. So I think that's where Illinois could run into trouble, but I think they just have too much offense for these first 2 games, and we're probably going to see that matchup.
Yeah, I think there's a clear-cut 4 best teams in this quadrant, and looks like, I mean, hopefully, I guess, I don't know about hopefully, but it seems like we might see all 4 of them make it to the Sweet 16 here.
Yeah, a little bit of chalk here. Let's move over to the South, starting with Houston. Houston is an interesting team because all season they've shown that the last few years haven't been a fluke. They belong at the top of the conversation in college basketball, dominated the Big 12 in their opening year, obviously lost that conference championship game to Iowa State in pretty rough fashion, and I
Lost
think
by
they're
20.
kind of
Yeah.
limping in here a little bit.
Yeah.
Juwan Roberts got hurt in the conference tournament. He came back against Iowa State in the championship game, but as you saw, he left the game against TCU. TCU out rebounded Houston, which rarely happens to Houston, especially on the offensive glass. So I think that's something to look out for is Juwan Roberts at 100% because we know they lost JoJo Tugler a couple weeks ago. He won't be back. They have suffered some injuries this year, and for a team that relies on being physical and beating you up on the glass, missing two of your guys that do that best could be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, they're a team that the two of us have gone back and forth about over the last few years. Every year they come into the tournament 30-3, 30-2, 31-2 every single year coming out of the American Conference. Finally, they come into the Big 12 and we're like, okay, well maybe they'll be a little more battle tested but have 7, 8, 9 losses. They come into the tournament 30-4 even in the clear-cut toughest conference um in the country. So, very impressive regular season for them, kind of an odd showing at the
Yeah,
end. Iowa State,
uncharacteristic.
very uncharacteristic. They lost by 23 to Iowa State. I don't believe they've lost by more than 10 to anyone this year, or maybe if they did, it was early in the year. But they seem to be beating down every single team and then suddenly lose by 23. It was odd, and it's hard to forget about it when that's the last game you see, but you have to look at the full body of work. Obviously, Juwan Roberts' injury is important, and they've got about a week of time here to get healthy before they play Longwood. They're going to get by Longwood regardless. But
Yeah,
when
I
you look
think
at
maybe if
that,
there's any question about Roberts, you probably sit him or only play him a little bit against
right,
Long.
yeah, I mean you're beating that team regardless. But when you look ahead to that second round matchup, Texas A&M versus Nebraska, Texas A&M was a top 10 ranked team before the season started, and they're certainly starting to play like it right now. I believe they get by Nebraska, and I think that they're actually the best 8-9 team in the bracket. So out of any of those 8-9 teams that will end up potentially playing a one seed, I think they're the best one. So if anyone thinks that a team could upset a one in the second round, they might be the best team to do it. However, Houston all year was top one or top two best teams in the country. So I'm looking forward to that matchup. Wisconsin, James Madison, on the other hand, is a very, very competitive first round matchup. I think we both agree that Wisconsin was a little bit overseeded, and James Madison, a team that also finished 31-3. So they're a 12 seed with only 3 losses. That's a really interesting first round matchup. Could go either way. And then I think that I personally like Duke over Vermont. Vermont seems to make the tournament every year, but I saw a stat that out of the last 6 years, they've won 0 matchups, 0 of their first round matchups. They're 0-6. So everyone seems to always pick them though in the first round, and they're 0-6 in the last 6 years. And Duke's a good team. What do you think about those last two?
Yeah, I also like Duke. I think especially Vermont's not that big, and I think they'll struggle with Filipowski generally. Duke's struggling a little bit, but I think you're right. The talent disparity is too big in that matchup. And the Wisconsin James Madison matchup is the best one of the group here. James Madison has a good argument to be a little underseeded here, only 3 losses. Wisconsin, in my opinion, is the most overseeded team in the bracket. This is a team that lost 13 games this year. And when you look at other teams that lost 13 games, notable teams that lost 13 games, Providence lost 13 games. They weren't close to dancing. St. John's lost 12 games. They're not dancing. Seton Hall lost 12 games. They're not dancing. So
And what's the same
those
thing
are,
with all those teams? Same conference, and
yeah,
I think Big East is a better conference than the Big Ten, arguably.
I think so
So
too. And I think most people that watched a lot of college basketball this year would agree with that. So the fact that this is a 13 loss team on the 5 line when we see a lot of 12 and 13 loss teams that have played high major competition all year not make the tournament, it does feel a little misseeded. Having said that, I think I really like what I've seen from Wisconsin lately. They've been up and down this season. Early in the season, they looked really good, top 5, top 10 team in the rankings week after week. Then that really dropped. They had a big losing streak and now starting to get back into form. I think they will go as far as AJ Storr takes them. He transferred from St. John's, by far their most athletic player, can finish around the rim. I think he was the kind of piece that they had been missing last year. And when he steps into the lineup, they get a lot better.
Mhm.
But James Madison's a really tough draw for them.
It
It's a
is
team that
very.
started out the season by beating Michigan State, really
Yep.
kind of stamped that they belong. They haven't been a Division I team for that long. So they're still kind of growing this program. It's been very impressive this year. And then the last, as you mentioned, at UConn, or sorry, I keep calling Houston UConn. Houston, Texas A&M. I think if we can
Similar
get
resumes.
in the second round, Jamal Shed and Wade Taylor, that point guard matchup, I think that's one of the better one-on-one kind of matchups we'll see the entire tournament. One of the best offensive point guards in the country in Taylor versus probably the best defensive point guard in the country in Shed.
Right. Yeah, I certainly agree. That's going to be a tough matchup. I think Houston comes out of this, 8 teams here. I think that
Yeah.
Duke has a pretty good draw here. Vermont, I think they take easy in the first round, and then I think they beat either Wisconsin or James Madison in the second. Um, I would certainly consider taking Texas A&M over Duke if that was the matchup
Yeah.
in the second round. I think the Texas A&M. I mean, they lost. They won 5 games in a row before losing in a close one to Florida in the SEC Conference Championship, including 2 straight against Ole Miss and a 10-point win over Kentucky. Just right before losing to Florida, they were up by 18 against Florida in that game as well, and they unfortunately weren't able to finish it out, and which led them to be kind of biting their fingernails come the selection show. But they made it in, and they're not underseeded, but they're better than the 9 seed, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true too.
Yeah.
Last thing to note with James Madison, they currently have the longest active win streak in college basketball. They've won 13 games in a row. So people like to talk about teams coming in hot. Nobody's coming in hotter than James Madison right now. Let's move to the bottom portion of this region, starting off with an interesting game in Texas Tech and NC State. NC State obviously qualifying through the automatic bid as they won 5 games in 5 days in DC, including knocking off their both Duke and North Carolina on,
Doing
was it
state rival.
back-to-back days?
It
I think
might have been
back-to-back
North Carolina
days.
was in the chip and Duke was in the semis, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
back-to-back days knocking those 2 teams off, both in-state rivals. That has to feel good. They sneak into the tournament and draw Texas Tech in the first round, Kentucky and Oakland, Florida against the winner of Boise State and Colorado, 2 teams that at least Boise State I thought was safe from having to go play in Dayton. But again, it's the bid stealers that knocked
Yeah.
Boise State down a little bit. Now they play Colorado and Dayton, which is a great first 4 matchup. And then Marquette draws Western Kentucky. The big question with Marquette, obviously, the health of Tyler Kolek. We think he'll be back, but didn't play at all in the Big East tournament, missed a couple games before then. The question is, can you get on the floor versus Western Kentucky to get back into the swing of things before he has to draw a really tough team in the second round?
Right. And Marquette has been really interesting over the past few weeks. Kolek, clearly their best player. He's been their best player for the last 2 years, one of the best point guards in the country. And in a very, very, high level Big East conference, they still made the finals and lost to UConn in the finals without Kolek. So I think that we've both been a little bit surprised as to how well Marquette has played without him. But the point is, their ceiling is obviously with him, and it's whether or not he can come back right away and just get into the swing of things. If he can, I think they're a title contender. If he can't, I don't think they'll be able to get by Florida
Yeah.
in a second round matchup or even a Boise State, which I believe is one of the best teams in the Mountain West. So that's a player to keep your eye on, Tyler Kolek from Marquette. And regardless, even if they do with Kolek, potential matchup with Kentucky down the line here. Kentucky is maybe a top 5 scoring team in the country. Or do you know if they're first or is that Bama?
I think Bama is first,
Okay,
but they
I
are
think they're
top 5.
first. Kentucky's got to be top 5. There's been games that didn't go to overtime where they scored 117 points.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a great matchup. I think we'll see that towards the end as I'm looking at these 8 teams. I kind of like Texas Tech over NC State, but that's a really good game. I think it could go either way. NC State obviously very hot, coming off wins over Duke and North Carolina, who are both likely better teams than Texas Tech. And then I like Florida. I think Boise State beats Colorado, and I think that Boise State Florida game could go either way. I kind of like Boise State. Florida's center just got stretchered off in a game earlier today, so I think Boise State might have the advantage there. And then if Kolek is healthy, I like Marquette. Going to the end here and facing Kentucky. Unsure about how I would go in a Kentucky versus Marquette matchup though.
Yeah, I think so. I think I like Kentucky in a matchup against Marquette, but honestly, I'm not sure I have Marquette getting past Florida, Tyler Kolek or not. The way Florida's offense has been playing, we talk about teams scoring in the 90s. Florida's routinely scoring in the 90s. They ran into a tough Auburn team today, obviously, but the last couple days, Florida scoring 95, I think 100 before that. This is a team that routinely scores in the 90s, and they have really good guard play. And one of the things we look for in March good guard play, veteran guard play. Walter Clayton, good veteran guard, played for Rick Pitino last year at Iona. Also a guy who makes his free throws, I think led the nation in free throw shooting last year. Zion Pullen from UC Riverside, another transfer who's been really good for Todd Golden at Florida. They have a trio of guards that can all score. So they're not reliant on one guy being able to get buckets for them. They can get offense wherever. Obviously, losing Hamilton hurts. But Tyree Samuel as a backup big slides in perfectly. He's been better anyway than Hamilton had been. So I think Florida, if they can get past either Boise or Colorado, and Colorado's a really talented team. They came into the season ranked. If they can get past one of those teams, I think they have a good shot to knock off Marquette. Moving up to the Texas Tech NC State game, I think I also like Texas Tech. They've been playing really well under first year head coach Grant McCasland. Pop Isaacs has been kind of their best player, and when they need somebody to get a bucket for them, he seems to routinely get it time after time. The question, I guess, is whether they're going to be able to contain DJ Burns, and do they have anyone big enough to handle DJ Burns? Because he's listed at 270. I think he's pushing a lot more than that, honestly. And he's been really tough to handle, and was really tough to handle, particularly for North Carolina this past week.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he's got great hands. He's putting up 18, 20 points a game on a limited amount of shots in his recent games. But just to go back to that Marquette Florida matchup, I certainly agree with you when it comes to the teams having experienced guard play. Without Kolek, I definitely get where you're coming from, but on Marquette's end, they've got a very similar trio of guards that are all very experienced as well. Kolek, that point guard that's going to be running the show. Jones, on the other hand, an extremely talented scorer, and then Stevie Mitchell, extremely talented defender. I believe won Defensive Player of the Year, or at least was first team defensive player. 3 experienced guards as well on that matchup. I think that really comes down to Kolek's, ability to play 35 to 40 minutes, in a close, tight game. But that's an interesting matchup to look at. A lot of experienced guards there.
Yeah, you're right. And Marquette doesn't like to go too deep into their bench if they can help it. So they obviously want Kolek out there as long as possible. Let's move down to the Midwest region, headlined obviously by Purdue, who will take on the winner of Montana State and Grambling State. Grambling State getting their first ever NCAA tournament bid. Then Utah State, the regular season champs out of the Mountain West, against TCU. Gonzaga getting up to that 5 seed. I think also, like Wisconsin, not sure if Gonzaga is a top 5 seed, but they get the 5 anyway. They face a 3-loss McNeese State team that's really strong under former LSU coach Will Wade. And then Kansas takes on Samford, another strong team. I think if you're looking at a region that's going to have chaos or a lot of upsets, it feels like it might be this one.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think, McNeese is one of those teams that, most people don't really know. They kind of really outperformed expectations this season with just 3 losses. Usually the main difference between these mid-major teams against these, more traditional blue blood teams is their size and athleticism. McNeese has a lot of high major transfers that are all, big parts of their roster, and they actually might have the most athletic players on the floor. I was just trying to look up his name. I think it's Shoemate. I'm not sure if you remember his first name. Christian Shoemate. He's about 6'6", 6'7", super athletic, putback dunks in most of the conference tournament games. They've got size, athleticism at all 5 positions. I like them over Gonzaga, who I agree maybe another overseeded team. Gonzaga traditionally a 1 or a 2 seed. Had a bit of a down year when it comes to their expectations. They lost in the championship to St. Mary's of their conference and lost to St. Mary's earlier in the year as well. So I certainly like McNeese. And then when it comes to that Purdue, let's talk a little bit about Purdue in the first round.
Yeah.
Even though we don't talk about 1 versus 16 matchups often, just because as many of you will remember, Purdue lost to FDU in the first round last year as a 1 seed against a 16 seed. They return a very, very similar team. And of course, all eyes are going to be on them in that first round matchup. I want to give you some credit here because a few years ago, Virginia lost in the first round to UMBC, the first ever 1 seed to lose to a 16 seed. Nobody was on them the year after. And then what did they do? They won the national championship the year after. And I do believe you had them to win it the next year. So I'll give you that credit for sure. So I just want people to remember that when it comes to Purdue this year. They have a very similar team, except last year their starting guards were freshmen. They're both sophomores now, and Braden Smith is all Big Ten first team player. Is now, is no longer a weakness for them. Their guard play. It's now actually a strength. They're a much better team than they were last year, even though they were a 1 seed last year. They're still a 1 seed this year. I don't see them losing in the first round. I don't see them losing in the second round. This is a team that can definitely win it all. However, Kansas as a 4 seed, dependent on the health of their two best players, if they're fully healthy, they're the talent level of a 1 or 2 seed. If they're not, they're the type of team that can lose to a 13 seed. So it's a massive disparity between whether or not we're going to get Kevin McCullough and or Hunter Dickinson to be playing fully healthy for them. So 2 players to definitely keep your eye on. I actually have them potentially getting out of this top part of the quadrant if they're fully healthy and potentially even beating Purdue in that matchup. Otherwise, Samford or McNeese could take them out really early.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, especially with Purdue, that their guard play, which was a weakness last year, is now one of their strengths. I think that's how they lost that game last year. It really wasn't that Edey played badly. It was FDU doubled, tripled Edey and tried to force guards to make shots in their first ever tournament game. And those were 2 freshmen that just didn't make shots. Now, whenever they need a bucket and it's not Edey, he kicks it out to Braden Smith and Braden Smith gets it done. Fletcher
Right.
Lawyer, we know, is a great shooter too. They have the guys around him now who have confidence coming into these games. I think obviously, I guess it shouldn't be obvious, but they get past the 16 matchup. And then I think they have a good draw in Utah State and TCU. I think those are both quality teams, but not teams that I think are of the caliber to
Right.
test a team like Purdue. So I think they walk into the second weekend where honestly, I think they probably get a gift in the second weekend because I think while McCullough might be healthy enough, I'm hesitant on Dickinson. I'm not sure if he's going to be 100%, even if he does play. And Kansas is running into a Samford team that's really hot, has only lost 5 games this year. And even if they get past that one, running into a McNeese team that is also really hot. I
Mhm.
like McNeese, actually, I think, to come out of this group of 4 and to take on Purdue, in which case I think Purdue dispenses of McNeese. And so that's why I really like this draw for Purdue. I think their most dangerous situation is they come up against a full strength Kansas team. And
Right.
obviously, the further Kansas goes, the better they get. Because with each passing week, if they can get past that first weekend, and that's the challenge, get another week for these guys to get healthy before they take on Purdue. That's going to kind of shape how Kansas's tournament goes. But yeah, I like Purdue out of this, and I do like McNeese to take down Gonzaga. I think that's kind of one of my big upset picks here.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think both of us would pick McNeese in the second if Kansas isn't fully healthy,
Yeah.
as well. If they are, I've got Kansas, and like I said, if they're fully healthy, I would maybe even lean towards them against Purdue, but that's a very tough matchup.
Yep. And the one last thing with McNeese, you mentioned that they have a lot of high major transfers. Almost everybody in McNeese's rotation is a transfer. All 5 starters are transfers. Their best player is Shahada Wells, a transfer from TCU.
He's
Shoemate's a
great.
transfer from Tulsa. Their bigs are transfers from, I believe, Ole Miss and another SEC school. So like these are athletes and these are guys that have played at the high major level also, and they're
Yep.
showing that they can win. So let's move down to the second half of the Midwest quadrant, South Carolina, Oregon. Little Jermaine Cousinard revenge game. He started
Mhm.
in South Carolina, now is the leading scorer for Oregon. Creighton against Akron. I was a little surprised to see Akron as a 14. I thought they would be maybe a 13. But they get Creighton in the first round, a tough matchup. Texas against the winner of Virginia and Colorado State. And then Tennessee against St. Peter's in that familiar 15 seed spot.
Yep, yep. Toughest matchup for me to pick, and this one was South Carolina versus Oregon.
Yeah.
Um, I got to be honest, Oregon is one of those teams I really didn't watch much this year. At no point did we really believe they would be in the NCAA tournament. They got the automatic bid by winning the Pac-12. So I did some research on them. They won their last 5 games. They held Arizona, one of the higher scoring teams in the country and one of the better teams in the country, to 59 points just a couple nights ago. And they held Caleb Love and Kylan Boswell to 3 of 17 shooting, I believe, in that game. So they've been holding a lot of teams under 65, 60 points. South Carolina, their offensive talent doesn't totally scare me when it comes to an NCAA tournament level team. Michi Johnson, their best offensive player, I think would be maybe the third or fourth best offensive player on a lot of these top teams. I like Oregon in this matchup in a close one, probably a low scoring game. However, they will not keep Creighton to below 75, 70 points. Creighton is one of the best scoring teams in the country. They must run them absolutely rugged during practices because their top guys play 38 to 40 minutes every single game. They barely use their bench, and one might think that's a big issue, but it doesn't seem like it is. They just play 40 minutes every game. They don't get tired, and they run the entire time. They've got four guys that all can go for 20, 25 points on any given night. And I actually think that Creighton, gets past not only the winner of South Carolina, Oregon, but also the bottom part of this half quad. I think that they're probably going to get into the Elite Eight here, potentially beating Tennessee in a matchup in the third round. I like Texas over UVA or Colorado State. I'm hoping Colorado State beats UVA. They're so boring. They score like 6 points and they've scored like 20 less than 20 points
They don't
in multiple.
belong in this tournament at all.
No, they couldn't score more than 50 points on some high school teams, but hopefully they get this barred in the playing game. Tennessee versus Texas, I'm seeing in the second round. That's a really good matchup, actually. But that's why I like Creighton because I think either Tennessee or Texas could take out the other one before facing them.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm leaning Creighton, although I think Tennessee is right there with them. I think this is kind of a coin flip between those two teams for me. The Virginia Colorado State game is interesting because if Colorado State wins that game, and I think they do, I think they can definitely push Texas. That's another really great point guard matchup with Isaiah Stevens and Max Asmus,
Yeah,
especially both of those guys with tournament experience. Asmus, obviously, with Oral Roberts when they made the Sweet 16, and then Isaiah Stevens beating Michigan, or not beating Michigan, losing to Michigan, but played great in that game. I think though that could be a really great point guard matchup if we get that one. If Colorado State can get past Virginia, but yeah, I think Tennessee and Creighton are kind of the juggernauts out of this part of the quadrant, and those are the two teams that I think would really push Purdue if they can get to that game.
yeah.
Tennessee obviously losing in the SEC tournament, a little bit surprising after they won the regular season tournament outright, or sorry, the regular season outright. And they kind of go as far as Dalton Connect takes them. I think the past Tennessee teams that we've seen the last few years,
Didn't have a
great
star.
defensive
I feel like.
teams, haven't had a star that can score, and Dalton Connect is exactly that for them. And then, like you mentioned with Creighton, I think that's going to be the interesting matchup because Tennessee is really physical, and Creighton obviously they don't go very deep. So can they keep their guys out of foul trouble? Because if Kalkbrenner picks up a quick two, they immediately drop down in value as a team. And we've
Right.
seen that with them before. Last year, Kalkbrenner missed 6 games. They lost all 6 of them. So he's somebody that they're going to need. They need to keep their guys out of foul trouble in this tournament because if he gets in foul trouble or any of their guys get in foul trouble, they could be in trouble. But I do like Creighton out of this bottom part, I think, as well.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say here is if Creighton and Tennessee were switched, so if the Tennessee was up there as a three and Creighton was down as a two, I think I'd have Tennessee coming out of this area. Just it's simply I think there's such even teams. It's simply because of the potential for Texas to take out Tennessee in that second round. A little bit of bracket strategy for you here. I feel like they'll give you a better chance of getting out of this quadrant because I think that they easily get by South Carolina or Oregon in the second. Whereas Texas played in the Big 12, won a lot of really tough games. I think that if they beat Tennessee, they could also beat Creighton. Very good team as a 7 seed.
Yeah, and Tennessee's had some trouble in the tournament in years past, whereas Creighton is one shot away from the Final Four last year.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's move over to, wrong page here. Let's get it back. All right, there we go. Let's move to the West region. North Carolina, the 1 seed out west, so they'll have to travel across country. They'll get the winner of Howard and Wagner. Mississippi State and Michigan State both clearing and getting into the field easily, despite both of them being very much on the bubble going into this past week. Mississippi State obviously helped their case with a win against Tennessee. Michigan State didn't help their case, but apparently it doesn't really matter. They just get it because they're Michigan State. 14
Yep.
losses, who cares? St. Mary's, Grand Canyon, a great 5-12 matchup. I like Grand Canyon there. And then Alabama against Charleston. Charleston, we heard a lot about last year. This year, they come back. They're not as talked about over the course of the year, but Pat Kelsey still has a really good team there. They get another 13 seed, and they'll take a crack at Alabama, who offensively is fantastic, defensively
Not so
not
much.
really present at all.
Right. Yeah, and I think that has the potential to be a really high scoring game. I believe, if I remember correctly, Charleston's a very good 3 point shooting team, as is Alabama. Alabama takes, they've got Nate Oates has got a philosophy over there, threes and layups only. If you watch them play, they get up and down quick. They take a lot of threes. They don't really take a lot of mid range jumpers, which is slowly, kind of leaving the basketball world. I think that could be a really fun, high scoring game. I think Alabama takes it. Um, I agree with you there on Michigan State. I don't think that they should be in the tournament. 14 losses in the Big Ten. It seems like the committee rewards the Big Ten with more teams than they should have every year, and then the Big Ten shows them that they're not good enough to be in the tournament. Maybe they'll have one or two teams that win in the first round, and then they do it again the next year, and the same thing happens, and then they do it again.
Yep.
So I'm not sure why they've got so many teams in. I don't think Michigan State deserved to be in. I like Mississippi State in that matchup. They're actually coming in pretty hot. That win against Tennessee was very impressive, and they almost won their last game as well. They could have ended up in the SEC tournament final. So I think that they beat Michigan State. I don't think they have the ability to beat North Carolina, but I do think that would be a pretty good game. I think North Carolina probably wins in a close one. I think Mississippi State will push them a little bit. I don't think that this group of teams is particularly challenging to UNC, a team that ends up being the fourth one seed, whether they deserved it or not. It was a close one. So I think that the fourth one seed should probably get a quadrant that's more difficult than a UConn or a Houston, which is clearly not what happened here. I think that we might be destined to see a North Carolina Alabama matchup, which is an okay matchup. Um, Not
Oh,
really sure how I'm getting.
I think it's great. It's not as high quality as maybe a
It's
1-4
not as
should.
like, oh, it's a great game. I just don't think
Yeah,
that the teams are as good as like an Auburn UConn matchup that we saw the
yeah,
other. I think both those teams beat both of these teams.
exactly. And I think like Alabama's a really good distinction to draw with Auburn. Like these are both 4 seeds. They played in the same conference all year. Like Auburn was the better team here.
Very
Like these
clearly.
teams should not be on the same line. But I agree with you. I think Mississippi State certainly looks better than Michigan State right now. Obviously, Tom Izzo can work some magic in that first round matchup, but I don't think either of them get past Carolina. The thing I will say about Carolina is their highs are really high, but they do have a tendency to take their eye off the ball a little bit. We saw that their most recent loss, obviously, to NC State. They lost their conference games that they lost this year: Georgia Tech, Clemson, and Syracuse. It's not like they lost to Duke, and there aren't
Yeah.
really top teams in this conference. So I
I
mean,
think they
anyone.
get up for big games kind of thing. Like they don't play as hard as they don't play the same
Right.
level of intensity on every game. And in the NCAA tournament, I
Yeah.
always say this: the lower seed will automatically play harder than the higher seed. It's very clear. That's why we see so many upsets. If you're a lower seed, you might not be the more talented team, so you go in and you play harder than the other team. It happens over and over again in the tournament, and these top seed teams need to realize that, or they will get upset, and then all of
Yeah.
our brackets will be busted they are every year.
Yeah.
So in North Carolina, like you said, a team that kind of takes their eye off the ball here and there against teams that they're supposed to beat. Mississippi State or Michigan State will be a team that they're supposed to beat. And if they don't, if they don't play to their caliber, they can easily lose that second round matchup.
Yeah, definitely. What I will say about North Carolina on the other side of the coin, and we've talked about this before, is they have guys, they're old, they're very old, and they have guys with really defined roles, and they all are very comfortable in their roles. There's never a question about who's
Right.
the go-to guy. It's always going to be RJ Davis. They have a secondary ball handler in Cadeau, who actually acts as the primary ball handler a lot. But they have those two guys who are going to handle the ball for them. Davis is going to shoulder a lot of the scoring load. Cormac Ryan knows his role. He's going to be a 3-and-D guy. The D is not there as much as the 3 is, but he's shown that he can get hot both for North Carolina this year and also in tournament games. We saw him, he had 27 against Alabama a few years ago for Notre Dame. He's 25 years old. This team is an older team, and obviously Armando Bacot is a big part of that. His 5th year in the SEC, not a more experienced big man that's really a quality big man in the country than him. So, and then obviously Harrison Ingram. So they have really defined roles, and I think going into this tournament, they have to have a lot of confidence, even coming off that loss to NC State. The interesting matchup here is the St. Mary's Grand Canyon matchup. And I'm not sure that St. Mary's is generally a better team than Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon, another team, 29-4 this year. And they have probably the best player on the floor in Tyon Grant Foster, averaged 19.8 points per game this year, 6 rebounds, might be an NBA player, and we know St. Mary's doesn't have probably any NBA players on their roster, so I think Grand Canyon has a very good chance of having the best player on the floor here and can challenge a St. Mary's team that sometimes struggles to score.
Yeah, I mean, I think that St. Mary's, benefited from a little bit of a weaker West Coast conference this year. Usually they get beat down, they beat every other team, and then just get beat
Yeah,
down. Gonzaga seems to happen every year. So they're a 5 seed. I think they earned the 5 seed. I think this is
yeah.
a pretty good matchup with Grand Canyon. However, I don't think either team gets by Bama in the second just because of Bama's ability to put points on the board quickly. And even as negative as I was speaking about North Carolina, they definitely might just be able to get out of this 8 team section here.
Yeah, and then St. Mary's, again, I mean, they were 15-1 in conference. They've won 17 of their last 18 games. I mean, they're 18 of their last 19 games, and very strong defensively. They are fifth in the country in opposing 2-point percentage. Opponents shoot only 43% against them from inside the 3-point line. So Grand Canyon's going to have to hit some threes to win this game. Just jumping back, because I remember as I said that I wanted to touch on this for McNeese a while ago. McNeese shoots 39.5% from three as a team.
Very
And that's
impressive.
one of the things you kind of look at for a team that's going to pull off an upset. Can they make a lot of threes? And McNeese is a team that does that. If Grand
Yeah.
Canyon does that, I think they knock off St. Mary's. Let's go to the bottom part of this region, starting with Clemson, New Mexico. I'll stop here because I'm guessing you have thoughts on this game.
I'm almost positive we're both on New Mexico there. I don't think
New
either of us.
Mexico's favored. They're a 2.5 point favorite in
I
this
was
game.
about to say
Yeah.
it's really it's unlikely to see an 11 favored over a 6, but this one just comes out at us as pretty obvious that the 11 might be the better team. New Mexico just won the Mountain West, one of the strongest Mountain West I've ever seen since we've started watching. They got
And they
um,
6 teams in, and it still feels like they were disrespected today
yeah,
because of
6
how
teams in,
low
and
they
they all have low seeds. I mean, New Mexico winning the Mountain West, only a 9-loss team, I believe. Probably could have been a 9 seed. Boise State was a last 4 in team. San Diego
Colorado
State is,
State the last 4 in.
yeah. Nevada,
Nevada's a 7-loss team playing Dayton. Nevada's the 10 seed, Dayton's the 7. I
I
think
wonder
Nevada
if
has
are
a better
they
record.
favored? If you look at the odds there, are they
That's a
favored
good
too?
question. I actually don't know. I
I
haven't
bet
looked.
they will be when we check.
Yeah,
I mean,
it should be.
if they're not, you better's
And
out
then
there.
Utah State, after winning the Mountain West, is an 8.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So they were a little bit underseeded. I think that this is kind of their opportunity to prove to the world that this is a really good conference if they perform well in the tournament. But as it comes to the matchup, I got New Mexico easy in that matchup.
Yeah.
I actually think that I might take them in the second round over Baylor. I think Baylor kind of ended the year on a little bit of a slow run. Um, they've got very good guard play. They're a little bit inconsistent. They play in a very tough conference. I think they get by Colgate here, but that Baylor New Mexico game is calling my name for a big upset, 11 over 3. So I'm definitely thinking about that one. I like Nevada over Dayton. Go Mountain West. Arizona in that first round matchup pretty easily. I think I see this going Arizona against New Mexico in a game to see who gets into the Elite Eight, and I could see New Mexico. Like I almost could see New Mexico beating them. I don't know
Yeah.
yet, but it's a interesting group here. I don't think Arizona played in a tough Pac-12 conference like they usually do. They lost a couple games towards the end of the year against
They
teams that,
lost 6 games in the Pac-12 this year, 5 in
yeah,
the regular season, and then 1 in the conference tournament in a weak conference.
and they weren't all against the best teams in the Pac-12 either. So it seems like they're kind of like a North Carolina team that can take their eye off the ball. Caleb Love is one of those players that's can score 35 points for you, but he can also shoot you out of games. Um, I think that he's probably really looking forward to potentially getting to go against his old team in North Carolina as if we get a 1 versus 2 seed matchup here. But they've got to get there first. And, Baylor on the other side there, New Mexico, I think that could go either way. But keep your eye on New Mexico for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. I think I mean, these are really, this is the toughest area I think that we've seen so far because I really think there are a lot of teams that could actually come out of this region.
Mhm.
Specifically, I mean, I do think one Mountain West team will be playing in the Sweet 16 here, whether it's New Mexico or Nevada. I think both have serious upset potential in not just the first round, but also in the second round. I think both of those
Doesn't
teams,
feel like an upset in the first round, but
right?
it
Yeah, I wouldn't even go
is,
so
I
far as
guess.
to call it an upset.
Yeah.
Arizona's reeling. I think Nevada can definitely take them down. Blackshear has the capability to both guard Caleb Love and also score on him. I mean, Love's not a great defender. Blackshear's a 6'6" point guard, and they have Jared Lucas, who spots up and shoots a lot of threes and makes a lot of threes.
Yeah.
So I think Nevada has the formula to beat Arizona and New Mexico, and Baylor is so great because Baylor's always so guard heavy and they have great guards, but New Mexico might have the better group of
They're going to be
guards.
moved. That's just going to be a fast moving game. A lot of loose
Yeah.
balls where it's like who's going to dive on the floor and get the ball first. I'm saying that as if it's definitely going to be a game if New Mexico gets by Clemson. But yeah, you're right. 3 guards on both teams that start, all extremely fast. That Jalen House versus Ray J. Dennis matchup will be electric.
Yeah.
Jalen House, son of former Celtics player Eddie House, he averages about 2.5 steals a game. New Mexico scores 82 points a game. They get up and down. They get a lot of steals. They apply a lot of pressure. And you'd think for a team like that, they'd be pretty guard heavy, maybe a little bit on the smaller side. But they're the top 40 rebounding team in the country as well. They start 2 guys above 6'8". They get a lot of block shots and rebounds, and they get up and down. They had a couple of mishaps in the middle of the year. I believe they lost to Air Force a
Yeah.
few weeks ago. That is kind of what put them onto the bubble in the first place. They were a shoe-in team for a while, then lost to Air Force, and then boom, now it's like, everyone thinks they're not a good team. And then they win the Mountain West Conference tournament. And now they're coming in hot. So that's kind of why I think that they're, so underseeded and could potentially go far here.
Yeah, I think so too. Particularly with New Mexico, they have, and part of why they've been able to rebound better and defend better this year is they have transfer bigs that have been really good for them. Nelly Jr. Joseph, another transfer for Iona, played for Rick Pitino last year, now plays for Richard Pitino, and he's been excellent as their 5-man. They got Mustafa Amzil from Dayton. They have a lot of transfers on this team too. Jamarl Baker played at Kentucky, and then he played at Arizona, and then he played at Fresno State, and now he's here at New Mexico. So like these guys
Horses.
are old also, and they've been around, and that's I think something to look for generally with these double-digit seed or these double-digit seeded teams. A lot of them have just as much high major talent just via the transfer portal. And
Right.
so a team like New Mexico has really utilized the transfer portal to get here. They've done an incredibly good job. I don't want to totally look past Clemson because I do think that Clemson is a little bit overlooked. And part of that is because they're a 6 and they don't feel like a 6 seed, whereas
Mhm.
they feel like more of a 8-9 or like a 10 seed. But Clemson's strong. And if PJ Hall can get the better of Nelly Jr. Joseph in that matchup, they're going to be tough to beat because we know how good Hall has been for them this year. So I'm looking at this region and the toughest one to figure out who comes out of these 8 teams. I think I like Baylor, but don't feel great about it.
I think that this is going to be actually the hardest. This is one of the main like the West Quadrant. I'm really not sure who I think is the best team in it. Like overall, these 8 teams and then the 8 teams above it. I don't really think there's a clear cut team that is a Final Four caliber team in this quadrant. So it's going to be interesting to kind of figure out.
Yeah.
You might get a team that you pick to make the Final Four that might lose in the first round. Could ruin everything.
Right. How
And
many
anything.
teams,
Yeah.
how many teams from the East quadrant could you drop into this one and you think that they would win it?
That's a great question. I mean, at
I
least
think it's at
4.
least 3.
I think it's 4 at least
Okay.
because
Yeah.
I feel pretty good about all the top 4 seeds winning this
Illinois
quad.
is the only one that I'm like, maybe I would take North Carolina over them.
Fair.
But the other 3, I'm just like, yeah, these 3 teams are better.
That's fair. That's fair. And I would pick. I mean, I think I would take Illinois over North Carolina, and then San Diego State as a 5. Like San Diego State could definitely win this quadrant in the bottom left here. Like I'm picking New Mexico, and San Diego State was, for the most part,
Yeah.
better than them. I'm not saying I'm picking New Mexico to win the quad. Just I've been picking New Mexico to go far. Maybe even San Diego State on that side too. FAU made the Final Four last year as a 9. They're an 8 in the East Quadrant too. So it's a little unfortunate the quadrant disparity here between the West and the East. It's so clear to us as people that watch college basketball all year that the East Quadrant is so much stronger. How could it have not been clear to 10, 15 athletic directors that supposedly watch college basketball all year to make them so uneven? I don't know.
All right, well, let's go back to the top. I'm not going to put you too much on the spot, but I am going to ask you for, I guess this is putting you on the spot. I'm going to
Yeah,
ask you for
figure it is.
your Final Four and your champion. You don't have to give me who wins this specific Final Four games, but your Final Four and your champion. And obviously, it's Sunday night. The bracket's been out for about 4 hours total, so you don't have to be locked into these. But who kind of sticks out to you as a potential Final Four?
Right, and of course, subject to change. We got a whole pool coming up here. I don't
But
want
we
to give
can't give away all the trade
our
secrets.
picks, and if anything, people are going to follow our picks and then get last. So whatever. So don't do it.
That's how it's
Um,
been the past few years.
it is. It is. You never know. It could be anyone. Anyone could. You could pick teams based on mascots and wins. So some of our information might be useless. Some of it might be useful. So use whatever you'd like. But I would say in the East, off the bat, I think in a quadrant that's so strong and so top heavy, you can kind of go with any of those top four teams to win. However, I do think that UConn is the best of those four teams. I think most people would agree with that. I'm going to lean UConn there for now, but I think that UConn Auburn matchup is like the toughest matchup of
Yeah,
any
I'm
one.
wrestling. I'm
Have to face.
wrestling with taking
It's
Auburn.
it's
Just
hard to like go that way, but then the other side is Illinois Iowa State, so just as hard. So there's no reason to think that way, I guess. But I like UConn there, and then in the West, that's the one that was the toughest for me. I think whoever wins that North Carolina Alabama game or matchup will probably win the quadrant. I think that I don't think North Carolina is consistent enough to go that far, so I might be going with Alabama to win that quad, which is I don't like saying it because again, like we just said, those other four teams I think are all better. We just spoke about how the four on the other quadrant is better than them, clearly.
yeah,
But I might have to go with Alabama in this bottom left quad. If we're going top right, south, I think I like Houston. I think that they're type of team that just bounces back. I don't think they're just going to lose by 23 and then kind of roll over. I think they're going to figure it out. They're very very well coached and they play extremely well on the defensive end, which is a perfect recipe to stay in games regardless of how your offense is playing. So I like Houston there, and then in the Midwest, I'm leaning towards Creighton. Um, the same reason as I said before, having them over Tennessee, and then I think that Purdue Kansas matchup could go either way, dependent on Kansas being healthy. I like Creighton. I think they have got the ability to just kind of outscore teams, run them out the gym. But of course, I think they'll be in a lot of close games too. So I'm going to go Creighton. So Creighton, Houston, UConn, and Bama. That's 2-1 seeds. Fair. And then the chip. I think I'm leaning Houston right
yeah.
now. I think I'm leaning Houston, which is crazy. I'm always against Houston, but
I
they're
know.
they're in the Big 12 now, and that was the reason why I didn't pick them before in the past. I kept saying that, so I'm leaning them now. I'm obviously going to stay in tune with all the injuries over the next few days over these teams. So I'm not locking myself in. Um, but yeah, that's what I got now, and you got it. You got to answer too.
Yeah. I think like you, I'm probably going to go with UConn in the East. I'm wrestling with taking Auburn over them, in which case I would just advance Auburn to the Final
Yeah.
Four. I like Auburn a little more than I like Iowa State and Illinois. I think I have to go with UConn. They really are the best team, and one of the big deciding factors for me in that game is those Final Four or those Elite Eight and Sweet 16 games are going to be played in Boston. Huge advantage for UConn in terms of their fan base. They
And their
already
fans
show
travel
out.
everywhere. They always do.
They show out. Yeah, exactly. They show out
Yeah.
everywhere, and this is 2 hours away for them. I don't know how much the Auburn contingent is going to travel and challenge them. So I do like UConn there. Um, did you go down to the West next?
Yeah, I did West.
Okay, the West. I think I also like Alabama, but I might go. I'll go Baylor here. Because I don't think I'm going to go Houston up top, and I think the Big 12 is going to get some representation. I do think it's been the best conference this year. I think they'll get some representation in the Final Four, so I'm going to go with Baylor. Then Scott Drew, the Midwest, or I'll jump up top to the South. I think I'm going to go Kentucky in the South. Um, I like their road. I think the Florida Marquette matchup is kind of tough. I think those two teams can maybe beat themselves up. I like their draw against either Texas Tech or NC State in the second round. I feel comfortable about them getting to the second weekend. And I think if they're able to get Houston and they can shoot the ball well, I think they have a chance to knock Houston off, especially with Houston's injuries. So I'm going to go with Kentucky there. Don't be surprised if none of these are the same in a couple days. And then in the bottom, I'm going to go Purdue. I feel good about Purdue this year. Like I said before, I really like their draw. I think especially the top half of that region, and obviously they won't have to run into both Creighton and Tennessee. One of those teams will knock out the other one, and I think that's where it starts to get really tough for them. But I just if I can advance a team a couple rounds without having to think about it and start
Yeah.
them there, I think Purdue has a really good chance to get to the Final Four. I think Purdue has a really good chance to win the title. I mean,
I was gonna say, let me guess your champ, and I was gonna say Purdue.
I think I have UConn Purdue, um, and it's just
That's a
a
great
matter of
game.
like,
That's a great
yeah,
game.
it's just I mean, like if that game happens tomorrow, I have UConn, but like
You think
I
there's a, I
think
mean, it's
UConn
a
has a
better
much
chance
much
Purdue
higher.
gets there? Is that what you, because
I think
I mean,
UConn
the
has a much
Auburn
better
game,
chance there.
we're both stuck on the Auburn game. That's a crazy game to have the number
It's
one
so
overall
early to
seed
have
have
that
to
big of a
play.
challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am gonna go UConn though over Purdue. Um, but I think that's really close, and don't be surprised if Purdue is the logo you see next to my bracket name in a couple days.
Sounds
Um,
good. Yeah, I mean, we're not, we have, just so everyone knows, first game is Thursday, 12:15,
yep.
during the workday. So, charge your phones, put your phone next to your computer, hide it from your boss, and watch the games. But what else you got?
Not a whole lot. I'm gonna plug the pool again. Definitely join the pick and fade bracket pool. Again, all of those details will be in the description on this video. So definitely join. We want to populate that as much as we can. You can show us your picks. And otherwise, yeah, tournament starts at 12:15 on Thursdays when the field of 64 starts.
Right.
Field of 68 starts on Tuesday, I believe, with Grambling,
And Montana
Montana
State,
State.
maybe
Yeah.
the couple of playing games. The 10 seed playing games are always cool. They're interesting.
Yeah.
They can definitely win a first round matchup.
And it's interesting we
Um,
actually have 10 seed playing games this year and not 11 seed playing
right.
games.
Usually it's 11, and I'm not sure if that's something that the bracket's going to change moving forward, or if it's just because of the four bid stealers that we got. I think that
Yeah.
is they wanted to switch it up because they thought those teams would be better compared to the like a
Yeah.
Duquesne. They wanted to put it 11 instead of 10, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was interesting. But yeah, let us know about the pool. Either of us on our socials, we'll post them as well. Please don't be late with getting in. It starts Thursday, so get stuff in. Um, and listen to the rules when you join the pool. There's a description. It tells you what to do. Um,
They're not too many. It's just pay on time.
right. This is a
Yeah.
pretty easy rule. Otherwise, you're not going to get the winnings if you win. Um, otherwise, anything else?
I got nothing else.
Should be good to go.
Always been fun.
Yeah, excited for the bracket to start. It's been a while. Every March comes around, even though the tournament ends in April. But let's do it.
Yep. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys again next year and every year after that, it seems. This is
Yep.
4 years running now, still going strong. So
Sounds
see you
good.
guys. Happy
Yep.
March.